to the Doctoring Differently podcast. I'm Dr. Naomi Lawrence-Reid, your host, a pediatrician, and creator of the Doctoring Differently digital course that teaches physicians of all specialties how to find and explore flexible, lucrative careers beyond full-time clinical medicine. For more information, visit doctoringdifferently.com. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Annie Andrews, a pediatric hospitalist and the Democratic nominee in South Carolina's 1st Congressional District in 2022. She is the CEO and founder of Their Future, Our Vote, a national nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to advancing a kids first agenda. And she is the founder of Their Future PAC, the first ever political action committee working to elect a kids first majority to the U.S. House of Representatives. Dr. Andrews received her medical degree from the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine and went on to complete residency training in pediatrics at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Andrews and all of the guests on the podcast. You won't want to miss any of them. Subscribe to the podcast at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to the Doctoring Differently YouTube channel to watch all of the episodes on YouTube. And now for my conversation with Dr. Annie Andrews. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Andrews. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So with all of my physician guests, I like to start in medical school. You are currently a pediatric hospitalist. So why did you choose pediatrics in medical school? Great choice, by the way, but I'm not partial. Go ahead.
Absolutely the best choice. So I was not one of those people who, as a teenager, loved to be around kids or babysit. I wasn't one of those people who went to medical school knowing I was going to be a pediatrician. I really had no idea what kind of doctor I wanted to be. But it was really the first moment I stepped foot in the Children's Hospital in Cincinnati that I thought, okay, this is for me. It was the people who worked within the Children's Hospital, but then it was also the children that I love taking care of, everybody from newborn to age 18 or 21 and talking to their parents and the kids. And it's just, to me, it's just such a positive working environment in so many ways that I felt immediately drawn to that field and really never looked back.
Okay. So then you went to residency. I think you stayed at the same institution, but did you enjoy it? How was your residency?
So yes, I stayed at Cincinnati Children's. I feel so fortunate that that was where I went to medical school. I felt like it was just an incredibly wonderful place to train. And I loved residency. It was quite some time ago. So the hours were long, lots of 30-hour shifts, lots of really early mornings in the PICU and on the pediatric surgery team and in the NICU. Mm-hmm. But I look back on those 3 years of my life as some of the best years. The camaraderie with my classmates and the variety of going from rotation to rotation. And I was just really, really pleased with the whole thing. And I left residency so excited for a career as a pediatric hospitalist. I was one of those people who always felt more comfortable in the hospital setting than the outpatient setting. So that decision was pretty easy for me. And I plan to have a very long traditional career as a pediatric hospitalist.
And I can echo that. I also trained at a large children's hospital and had a great time and really enjoyed it. And like you, left with visions of just a full-time clinical career. I think I assumed it would be maybe something like my residency training, which, yes, a lot of hours, very rigorous, but also a great learning time and great experience with other training doctors. So after, I think maybe, did you graduate before pediatric hospitalist fellowships were a thing, or did you do a fellowship?
Yes. So I ended up coming down to Charleston, South Carolina, and did a general academic pediatric fellowship because you're right. There were a couple pediatric hospital medicine fellowships at the time. But there was not that pressure to do the fellowship for the additional clinical training. And I knew that I wanted to work in an academic center. At least that's what I envisioned for myself. Mm-hmm. And so the academic fellowship gave me 2 years. I got my master's in clinical research. I had all kinds of protected time to learn how to be a health services researcher. And it was for me, looking back, a really nice sort of transition period from residency to a full-time academic job.
Okay. And how long was that fellowship?
It was just 2 years.
Okay.
And, I remember that transition from, the 80-hour work weeks for 3 years. And then all of a sudden I had all this like independent learning time as a
Uh-huh.
master's student. And, I had a very low clinical load during fellowship. And it was really a lot of independent time, doing my master's courses, doing my own research, getting lots and lots of excellent mentorship.
Okay.
And so it was 2 years, but I think it was a really, for me, for the path that I have taken, it was a really good investment in like developing more skills to be an effective academic pediatrician.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you're in Charleston. You've completed this fellowship. What are your first full-time attending years looking like? Where was that?
Yeah, so I stayed at the institution where I did my fellowship. I was very happy to join that division of pediatric hospital medicine there. And I had a very traditional sort of breakdown of my, responsibilities and roles as an initially clinical instructor, then assistant professor in pediatric hospital medicine. I did a fair bit of clinical time rotating, with residents and medical students, very traditional academic setting. And then I always had some amount of buy down to continue my research. And one of the things that happened in those first few years when I was really, I was writing a lot of papers. I was an asthma researcher. And, my chair at the time was very supportive and actually gave me additional buy down so that I could write a career development award. I ended up doing that and, got an institutional K. So then I left my heavier clinical load to do, a heavier research load for a couple of years. And so, but again, like a very traditional pediatric researcher track.
Sure. Okay. So what happened next? Where are we? I don't know what year we are at this point. It sounds like, fortunately, you're truly enjoying your work, what you've done, what you're creating for your institution. It sounds like you had some nice buy down of your clinical time, so you were able to write the grants and research and have some independent and autonomous time and thinking, which is so important for all of us, and unfortunately not necessarily afforded to many of us. So I love to hear that when doctors can carve out that time and make that place for themselves within their institution. And it sounds like you were supported as well. So all signs for me right now, I kind of know how this starts to go, but it sounds like you are set up for maybe a lifetime career doing what you're doing, which is what you love and are good at. What changed?
I love this question. No one's ever asked me this question in this way. So it really there's a few things I can highlight, but the thing that happened on February 14th, 2018. And that was the day of the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. February 2018, I was already the mom of 3, and my oldest was in kindergarten. So this horrific school shooting was the first school shooting I experienced as the parent of a school-age child. So in the days that followed that shooting, I felt an incredible sense of anger, frustration, vulnerability. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do with all of these feelings. I was dropping my daughter off in her, kindergarten drop-off line, watching the armed police officer patrolling, and just, again, felt so vulnerable. She marched into her school with her little unicorn backpack on. I went home. I was engaged politically at that point enough to have the office numbers of my senators and representatives saved in my phone so that if something was happening related really to child health or issues that I care about, I would call and leave a voicemail or talk to a staffer. So that morning I did. I talked to a staffer in Senator Tim Scott's office and I said, I'm a pediatrician in Charleston. I'm tired of seeing children who've been shot. I'm a mom of 3. I just dropped my daughter off at school. I don't know if she's safe there. So surely the senator is going to open up a conversation about his position on common sense gun safety legislation. And then I was dismissed. Oh no, he's a Second Amendment guy. Really, end of conversation. So then to tie it back to my job at the time, I had those conversations. I was standing in my bathroom at my house. I kind of looked on my computer, found the local chapter of Moms Demand Action, made a mental note that, okay, I think I need to do something. I think I need to join an organization, somehow get involved to channel these feelings I'm having. And then I vividly remember driving to my job at the academic medical center at the Children's Hospital, sitting in the parking garage, kind of like decompressing before I was going to walk in for my day. And I remember thinking, am I really going to go sit at my desk and continue to use these databases to study controller medication adherence amongst children with asthma when kids are getting shot every day in this country? And I just had this moment of like, I can't do that. Like, that's not enough for me. That doesn't make sense to me anymore. So I'm just going to totally pivot and use the skills I have obtained in my master's program and through several years of writing grants and writing papers and become a gun violence prevention researcher, knowing that I wasn't going to have like a impressive track record of funding on that topic. Like, it's very hard to be funded as a gun violence prevention researcher. But I just knew I had to do it. I was like, I can't go sit at my desk and type away about asthma anymore. I just can't. So it was this moment for me where this spark, and I knew that like everything was going to be different moving forward. And so that's really the first pivot.
That's powerful. That's a powerful pivot. And unfortunately, living in this country, I remember where I was when I heard about each of these school shootings. And so many of us can and do. And we're scared for a couple days and then we numb ourselves until the next one. And so many of us, don't do anything, don't think we can do anything. But everything you've said is so true that if, as physicians, particularly pediatricians, if we're talking about gun safety and children, who better than us than to be the loudest voice in the room? We are far from the loudest voice in the room. We're actually told, keep your head down, see the patients, continue your asthma research. This is a Second Amendment thing. This is a constitutional thing. When in fact, this is a different country than when the Constitution was written. And these are different guns and these are different people. And the restrictions are perhaps not maybe what they should be. Okay, so what happened next? It sounds like you were called to action. You felt the call. What did you do next?
So I did. I felt the call and I just followed my gut. I think I was far enough into my career to have the self-confidence to take this pivot. I had enough political capital at my institution at the time that my mentors weren't like, what are you doing? This is crazy. So I did this pivot. I started to figure out how I could use these databases, state Medicaid databases and these large national databases of, administrative claims data, how I could use these to answer the questions that we don't have answers to in pediatric firearm injury, which, is essentially every question in pediatric firearm injury because there's been essentially no funding for us to study this problem. So I knew there was a million unanswered questions. I knew that the databases I knew how to use and the research team I had built could help contribute to the knowledge base about this problem. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be satisfied just, again, looking at data that's several years old, writing a paper describing the demographics of children who are injured by firearms and what their healthcare utilization that was not going to be enough for me. So like I mentioned earlier, I looked up Moms Demand Action. I went to the next meeting in my local community. And I, again, vividly remember this evening. I left the hospital. I had a busy day at work. It was on my calendar to go to this meeting in downtown Charleston. I was going to know 0 people at this meeting. I wasn't like going with a buddy or anything. And I remember thinking, I really just want to go home. I'll be more comfortable at home. I want to see my babies. But I forced myself to drive downtown, park my car, find this building, walk into this basement with about 15 other women, mostly. And I sat there, and within 15 minutes of that meeting, the woman who was leading the meeting said, we have a gun safety training program. It's called Be Smart. And the goal is to educate adults about the importance of secure firearm storage so that we can reduce the incidence of unintentional injuries amongst children in this country. We've been working for years to make connections at the Children's Hospital, but it's really, really hard for us as an organization to meet, to break down those barriers and to get into the Children's Hospital. And so I had this moment of well, I've worked there. They didn't know who I was. It's like, I've worked there for 10 years. I can make this happen. And so I had this immediate on-ramp, this organization needed me to do this very concrete thing. And that's exactly what I needed because, again, I'm not a joiner. I'm an introvert. I felt uncomfortable in that room full of strangers, but it was meant to be that they needed me in that moment. I needed them so that I could feel like I was doing something about this crisis in our country. And then it became very clear that they needed me. And so it just all snowballed from there. We took the Be Smart program into our children's hospital. I worked with this incredible group of residents on a QI project. We trained up our residents about how to talk to patients and their families about secure firearm storage. I started speaking out more and more. And to your point before, we should be the loudest ones on this issue. And I would show up at, these panel discussions I would be invited to be on. And I had a really early important lesson in the importance of our voices as pediatricians and the strength and power of our voices, because I'd be on these panels sitting next to community members, most who have had lived experience with gun violence, who've been doing the unglamorous work of gun violence prevention, advocacy, and activism in the community for years. They'd ask us a question, and the person next to me would have this beautiful, eloquent, brilliant, inspiring answer. And then I would answer and say something far less eloquent, beautiful, and inspiring. But people in the audience, oh, Dr. Andrews, yes. Oh, what Dr. Andrews said, it's so important. And I was like, oh my gosh, they listened to me because of the letters behind my name. And so one of my roles here is to uplift the voices of people who don't experience that privilege in the way that I do. And so that for me was enough of a reason to continue to show up in those spaces so that I could uplift the voices of the people who do not experience the same privilege that I experience.
It's so impressive and inspiring for you to show up to a meeting where you describe not knowing anyone, not knowing the organization intimately, but just wanting to do something else at the end of a long day and still showing up, and the importance of that and how that has, as you said, snowballed, and how taking a step toward that thing you want suddenly was the access point to so much. It's such a symbiotic relationship, it sounds like, between you and that organization. And at the same time, to what you said about, yes, as physicians, we should be the loudest in the room. And you are right. When we do speak up, people pay attention, people listen. I talk to so many physicians, and I myself experienced that, unfortunately, in so many of these large academic settings, we're intentionally made to feel like we have no impact and we can't change things, and our voices are small compared to the machinery of a large institution, an academic center and university. And I think that's also very much by design. And so I talk to physicians who are scared to say anything potentially inflammatory or incendiary on social media. They use acronyms. They use their, dog's name and their kid's middle name as their profile, name, because they don't want to be found. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want the institution to come after them. But at the same, they don't want people to see. But as you said, people respect us. Who else? Who better to talk about truly anything regarding health? We could talk about contraception. We could talk about COVID, all of the things that happened around COVID medications in 2020. And of course, gun safety. But, physicians were not the loudest voice in the room, right? Politicians with other motivations potentially were, and they are the ones ultimately driving and stopping so much of the progress and change we would desire. Yes. Okay, so tell me what I see this burgeoning, this movement you're starting. You're in Cincinnati, you're in Charleston, but you're in your academic center. You're working with residents, training on gun safety at home. What happens next?
As you were talking, I'm just reflecting, I can't believe this is the first time our paths have crossed, because everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, exactly this. Yes. Because you're describing exactly my experience. So, I started, you're right, there's unwritten curricula in medical school, in residency, those of us who go straight to an academic position where you are made to feel like you cannot rock the boat. This is your job. Be grateful you have this job. It is a privilege and an honor for you to be able to work here. And here is the very concrete paths you may take as a member of our faculty.
That's right.
And so I started to just sort of poke the bear a little bit. We started with the safest way to have a conversation about gun violence, which is secure firearm storage, which the AAP tells us we should talk about. It's really a way to get your foot in the door to start a conversation at a large institution about this issue that has become so hyper politicized. So, I continue to kind of just poke the bear and through this process also, realized my voice was important on these community panels, but also my voice was important at the State House. So I started spending time developing relationships with lawmakers in the South Carolina state legislature, informing them, using my expertise to help them build their testimony when there would be a committee hearing about gun violence or reproductive health care or COVID, as you said. And so I developed these relationships and started paying attention to what was happening in Columbia, South Carolina, and had this realization that, okay, I'm smarter than most of the people in these rooms. I come at these issues with very pure intentions, which is to do what is best for every child in this state and in this country. And most of the people who sit around these tables where important decisions are made that affect our children's well-being, health, and safety, most of these people couldn't care less. They don't they don't seek expertise to inform their votes. They actually turn away expertise when it comes knocking on their door, trying to explain why it is so important for South Carolina to have a secure storage law, or why it is so important for South Carolina to expand Medicaid. They don't want to hear it because everything is so hyperpartisan and deeply politicized. And as a profession, as child health advocates, we have essentially given up our seat at the table by not being engaged in politics. And that is also by design, right? We are taught to keep our mouths shut. I can't tell you, I got chills when you were talking about we're told to be quiet. And my advice for anyone who is told to be quiet is to get louder.
Yes.
And to ask yourself, who are they trying to protect?
Yes.
Because I'm speaking up on behalf of children based on my expertise and the evidence and data that tells me what is in the best interest of children. And if someone who somehow works at a children's hospital is telling me to be quiet, who is it they are trying to protect and who are they speaking for? And then once you realize what's happening there, it's all the more reason to just get louder.
Absolutely. And what you're describing is you took us a step up and started looking down at the players, at the framework, at who's protecting who, at if we're talking about the ultimate goal being protection of children, which I would argue to say if you put a microphone in front of 100% of Americans' mouths, they would all say, yes, that is important. We want children safe. However, if you were to continue around issues of gun safety, well, the waters get a little murkier. So you're absolutely correct. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to talk about your run for Congress right when we come back with Dr. Annie Andrews. This episode is brought to you in part by Era Locums. Are you a physician seeking flexibility, autonomy, and a more fulfilling career? If so, Era Locums is the modern concierge locums company you've been looking for. They are hyper-focused on empowering exceptional specialist physicians to practice at the top of their licenses in healthcare systems that need them. Do what you love on the terms you love. Find your people today at eralocums.com. That's ERALOCUMS.com. We are back with Dr. Annie Andrews. Dr. Andrews is a hospitalist, a pediatric hospitalist in South Carolina, and was motivated by one of the many school shootings in this country to become active in gun safety in her local community, in the South Carolina legislature. So Dr. Andrews, what happened next when you started making these connections? You were being vocal, you were being loud, you were starting to be the loudest voice in the room, which pediatricians and physicians need to be about all of the health and safety in this country. What was your next step?
So it all happened very quickly, and I had developed these relationships with some state lawmakers, and there was an opportunity. There was a congressional seat here in South Carolina's 1st that had traditionally been held by Republicans. It flipped blue in 2018, flipped back red in 2020. So in 2022, it was a real opportunity. And I felt like as a party, we needed a compelling candidate on the ballot to run against this first term incumbent who was failing our children on all measures related to climate, gun safety, COVID, child poverty, affordable healthcare, everything I care about. She wasn't getting the job done. So a state senator, Marlon Kempson, planted the seed. I said, who's going to run against Nancy Mace in 2022? We need somebody. Come on, who's going to do it? And he said, Annie, you live in that district. Why don't you do it? And I remember exactly where I was sitting when he texted me that. I was sitting in the little faculty office at the Children's Hospital. I looked at my phone. I showed it to one of my colleagues. I said, oh, isn't this hilarious? And then it just like festered in my brain for the next, honestly, it was just several weeks. Every morning I thought, I'm going to wake up and think, well, that was a ridiculous idea. Of course, I'm never going to run for Congress. I don't know anything about politics. I've never taken a political science class. I kept waiting for that like feeling to hit me one morning. And it just never did. Every morning after that little seed was planted, I woke up feeling more and more driven to just do it. I didn't have like an extensive pro-con list. Certainly I had important conversations with the people who are most important to me in my life about what this would look like. I talked to local people who were involved in campaigns and elections to really get a sense of like what it would be like to run. But I didn't like weigh the risks and benefits and pros and cons. And honestly, if I had, I never would have run. But I just like dove in head first because again, I felt called to do this. It just felt like the next logical step for me to use my voice and my expertise and to bring a voice like mine to this level of debate in my community, in my congressional district, in my state and beyond. So I just, within a matter of weeks, decided to run for Congress in South Carolina's 1st district in 2022.
And I just have to mention the elephant in the room that you are in South Carolina. So for all of the things we discussed in the first half about, physicians in general feeling like we don't have a voice, feeling like we're small and insignificant oftentimes in these large academic centers and unable to move and make big change. You have in your state, a somewhat radical approach, perspective that is different from I'll say the political majority in your state. You're not in the Northeast. You're not in California. You're in South Carolina. So, and still, you continued and pressed on. Okay, you decided to run. How did it go? What surprised you? What was the best? I want to know everything. Tell me about running for office.
First, I'm going to say I have zero regrets about running. I'm so glad I did it. It has led me to like the next several steps in my life and in my career. Great. I'm so proud of myself for being brave enough to do it.
Yes.
I'm
so proud of you too. Like I don't even know you and I'm proud. You. Oh, it was the best.
Thank you. Thank you. I have 3 small kids. And sometimes when I like joke about, well, I ran and lost and all the like negative things that have happened in my life since then, some people will say, but your daughters watched you do that.
Yes,
and you
they
have
did.
No idea the impact that is going to have on their lives moving forward.
Forever.
So I put together a team of some really great people. We picked our launch date. We filmed a launch video that morning. We posted it on Twitter and it went crazy viral. It was this like, I wish I could relive this day. It was just this incredible outpouring of positive energy and support from healthcare professionals all across the country, from, political strategists, political people, famous people, celebrities. Like it was wild. And in retrospect, I'm like, what was that? Like, what did we tap into? And I think it was a combination of things. We were, emerging from the depths of the worst part of the COVID pandemic. Healthcare professionals as a whole, I think were feeling very beleaguered and beaten down and needed something to like make them feel hopeful, to make them feel seen, to validate their voices and their expertise. So I think we tapped into a lot of that. And then, I will say this every day until I die. Like we are in desperate need of politicians who are not traditional politicians, people who just come at these issues authentically and speak like real people, speak with real passion on these issues. And so all of that I think was bundled into this launch video that went viral. So we raised a ton of money, which then like leads to more campaign success. And, we're going to get to this. Obviously I didn't win. You didn't introduce me as a congresswoman, but
not yet.
We changed.
Not yet.
That's right. We changed the conversation in my state, in my district, and truly across the country about what doctors can do. Obviously, I'm not the first doctor to ever run, but it was just this incredible moment to be a part of and to really be at the center of. And we just continued to build and build and build on that in the campaign. And I was able to talk about the issues I care about, and that's what matters to me most. Our very first TV commercial that we ran that fall leading up to the election was me holding an AR-15 bullet and talking about the impact of gun violence on children. I can guarantee you no politician has ever run an ad holding a bullet in South Carolina or ever run an ad on guns on our side of the issue, my side of the issue on guns before. But I did not run to talk about taxes and inflation. I ran to draw attention to the issues that I believe our children desperately need us to focus on. And so it was just like beginning to end an incredibly positive experience, even though I didn't win on election night.
And I think I saw that video. Are you wearing a white coat and standing kind of in front of maybe your office and it's brightly lit?
Yes.
And I remember seeing that a few years ago as well. And that's, I'm sure, what put you on my radar even then. And yes, of course, as a pediatrician, I immediately saw it and thought, oh, that's a pediatrician's office. And that woman is likely a pediatrician. And you're right, struck such a chord and a depth. And after COVID, and all of the things we've mentioned, healthcare providers, physicians in particular, feeling like we have no control, no voice. It is only politicians dictating how we practice, what we can and can't do, what we can and can't prescribe. And you're right, that video did, I think, put you on a lot of people's maps. Okay, so you didn't win that run. Again, we are keeping all of the doors open. I'm using my language very carefully because I just don't feel like it is the end of that. But so what happened next? You said you made great connections, great experience. I so love to hear that because, we as physicians are so scared of quote unquote failing at anything. And that is one of the reasons we don't even start or try new things. We don't want to come out at the other end looking like, well, I didn't accomplish my goal. So what was the point of any of that? We're perfectionists in every way, and that keeps us often on the sidelines of these important issues and important ventures. So what happened next for you?
That's exactly right. I've referred to myself as like a professional loser before because I have failed on like the most public national scale you could possibly fail on. And, we've all written papers that have been rejected and applied to give talks that have been rejected and, grants that I am a professional failure, but I also have a lot of successes under my belt, and you have to fail to succeed.
You absolutely do.
If we're not public about our failures, then people are going to be scared to try.
Right.
And I think when I lost my campaign, my election, I failed up. What I learned, so there's a good story and a bad story, and I really do want to tell both stories about what happened after the election.
Yes.
But we'll start with the good stuff, which is by running, I finally understood what makes politics work in this country. And I finally understood why children get left behind time and time and time again. And it's because children are not seen as a powerful political constituency in the United States. And that is a fact. And the reason, the most cynical people will say, well, of course they're not. They can't vote and they don't have money. So how are they supposed to amass political power? Well, I think there's so many of us who operate in our own little worlds and bubbles that don't then translate that into the political. So there's very few people who know what it's like to be a pediatrician, it's probably anyone who works in a children's hospital, a pediatrician's office, or at a public school, who understands all of the systemic challenges our children face. There are very few people who operate in those spaces who then get a behind the scenes look at the political space. And so I'm one of those few people who understands intimately both sides. And I was able to connect the dots to see, okay, we can actually fix this problem for children in this country if we build a movement that centers children in our political conversations. And what that looks like in the United States of America in 2024 is it's money. Money speaks in Washington, D.C. Money is power. Money is political power. And we have to start somewhere. This has never been done before. So what we decided to do was to launch an advocacy organization and an affiliated political action committee called Their Future PAC. Their Future PAC is our nation's first and only political action committee for children. And what that means is we are busy every day trying to raise money so that we can then support candidates who are willing to put kids first. And if people go to our website, theirfuturepac.org or theirfutureourvote.org, you can very quickly understand what it means to put kids first, because we have boiled it down to a very simple 5 pillars of issues that we think are the most threatening to our children. And it includes gun violence, climate change, child poverty, public education, and access to affordable quality healthcare, and a couple legislative points behind each of those pillars. So to force our candidates and elected officials to talk about these issues on the campaign trail and then actually translate that into legislative priorities once they get elected, we have to get a seat at the table. And the only way to get a seat at the table for children in Washington, D.C. and in state capitals all across this country is with money.
That's right.
Like, I can show up at on Capitol Hill with a white coat every day, knock on a door, show them my cute little policy papers that are well written, well informed, and evidence based. But if that is not paired with some sort of, money operation, then it's always going to be put on the bottom of the pile. And it's unfortunate, but that's the answer. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build an organization that finally makes children a powerful political constituency in this country so that they can become a legislative priority for legislators on both sides of the aisle.
That is tremendous. So are you looking at state, local government, state, national, or you're open to any running politicians who pick up the phone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is our first election cycle. We launched our organization a little over a year ago, and we got very good advice to kind of pick a lane to begin with. So for 2024, we're focused just on U.S. House races.
I see.
So our goal is to elect a kids first majority to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2024. And a kids first majority that would be willing to act on climate change, gun violence, and all the issues I already mentioned. And then as we continue to build our organization, we want to get involved in elections up and down the ballot, from the presidency on down to school board, because the stakes are high at every single level.
Every level. Yes.
But we're brand new. Mm-hmm. Yes, every level. One way to think about the absence of political power for children is to think about the AARP. So the AARP, or ARP, whatever you want to call it, is a political powerhouse in this country. It's a household name.
It is.
Their legislative priorities are always a priority in the halls of Congress and in state houses, no matter who holds the power. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is, in 2023, their lobbying budget was $16.5 million. That's amazing. Good for them. Their priorities are important. Do you know what the AAP's lobbying budget was in 2023?
What was it?
It was under $1 million. It was under $1 million. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The AAP is not meant to be what we're building or what the AARP is, but it's the closest thing we had until we started our organization to giving children a voice in Washington, D.C. They have an incredibly important role to play, but they're a 501c3. They do not engage in politics, elections, campaigns.
Sure.
They're doing the policy work and some amount of lobbying. But if you compare $16.5 million spent on lobbying for the AARP's legislative agenda to under $1 million spent on the AAP's legislative agenda, you can start to understand why children continue to get left behind.
Right.
But it's not an easy task to convince people that they need to put their money where their mouth is. And if they care about children, if they care about these issues that you and I both care about, then they need to start thinking about how to engage in politics on behalf of children, because that is not something we have done effectively in this country before.
Right. Now, you still practice clinically. So what, if I'm talking to a group of physicians who, like you, at least shared your early frustration and anger and fear around gun safety, but, were immediately halted by the pressures of being a physician, right? Of having a full-time job, and couldn't at the time, for whatever reason, maybe launch off into a path of true action for those issues. What does your day-to-day look like? Are you still practicing clinically? How does that tie in with your other so important work right now?
Yes, and one of the things I'll start by saying is when I speak to large audiences, especially when there's residents and medical students in the audience, I always like to stress that, it might not be the season in your career to do something like I did. And certainly I don't expect everyone who hears me speak and feels motivated and inspired to go out and run for federal office. But what I do say is that no matter how busy we are, no matter what stage of your career you are in, we all have space to dial up our advocacy, activism, or political engagement in some way, even if it's just the tiniest little bit. When I was an early faculty member and I was starting my family, I had small children at home. There is no way I could be doing the work that I do every day now. So we have to give ourselves some grace and understand that it might not be time for us to go head first, but we must find ways to dial it up. And then when it is time, when the moment strikes us, when we feel called, when we see that we have the mental capacity and the logistical capacity to do it, that we do what I did. Don't ask yourself a million questions and give yourself a million excuses to not do it. Just dive in and do it. Right. Because in my case, the things I'm fighting for, our children are so worth it. Yeah. But to get to your question, I wear many different hats today. And I told you there was sort of a sad story after my election. I do think it's important to talk about this because we've been talking about the institutional pressures, institutional politics. And, the fact of the matter is I actually got promoted to professor during my campaign, just the timing of the promotion cycle. Yeah. It was funny. We sent a press release and people were like, this doesn't matter to us.
Yeah, right. It matters to us in medicine, but nobody else really cares. But go ahead. Yes.
No, my campaign team was like, what does this mean?
Right.
But anyway, so I was a full professor. I had started our advocacy curriculum for our residency. I was a pediatric hospital medicine fellowship director. I had great reviews from students and residents. I'd published a ton of papers, gotten grants. So I was a very model faculty member. But the really hard lesson I learned is that doesn't really matter sometimes, because the fact of the matter is, after I lost, I went in to meet with one of my bosses and I said, I don't know what my political future is going to look like, but I would like to continue part-time clinical work here at this institution where I've worked for about 15 years. And I essentially was told they didn't have room for me anymore.
Wow.
So I was not given the option of continuing to work clinically at the institution that I had poured my heart and soul into for nearly 15 years. And I still haven't fully processed all of this. It was heartbreaking and shocking and so deeply disappointing. And really, it was a lot because I think, I'm sure you hear other people say this, we think our institutions love us back, and they certainly
they do not.
Don't.
No,
and
never.
I'm so glad I know that now.
Yeah.
So my clinical job, I actually, I'm talking to you, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina right now, but my clinical job is in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So I fly up to D.C. once or twice a month. I'm flying up there tomorrow, and I work as a pediatric hospitalist at Children's National Hospital.
Okay.
So when everything happened with my home institution, I reached out to division director colleagues and friends in other institutions, and many were very, very welcoming. And I just feel so grateful that the folks at Children's National in DC welcomed me with open arms. Yeah. And as soon as I started joining their division meetings and doing my clinical shifts up there, it was like culture shock. I felt like one of those, puppies who's had to be rehomed because they lived in a non-supportive environment. They'll say it gently.
Yes.
Because now I'm in a meeting in DC, and they're like, Annie, we have some time. Tell us more about what you're working on with gun violence prevention. I'm like, wait, I'm allowed to talk about that here? You want to hear what I'm doing? You're proud of me?
Yeah.
And their social media team, they're like, oh yeah, please tag us in anything. And it was just it's a complete 180 from the experience at my home institution, and a lot of hard lessons there. And I say that because we have to go in with our eyes wide open when we do these things, when we start to use our voices, when we start to kind of operate as agitators within these systems, when we know that things need to change, but there are very real consequences to doing that.
Sure.
And I was at a stage of my career where I could sort of recover from what happened to me. And I had enough of a national reputation just within my field that, other division directors were happy to have me. And so I realized there is privilege in that. I also have the ability to fly to DC to work clinically. Not everyone could do that. but very real, scary consequences for physicians, especially in these large institutions that choose to speak up and use their voices. And it's so unfortunate, but I think people outside of academics need to understand all of that pressure that's put on us as individual faculty members to not speak up about guns, to not speak up about abortion, to not speak up about masks and COVID vaccine. I mean, it's gotten so crazy, but very real consequences for those of us who choose to speak up.
I am in awe of that. I did not expect that to be a consequence of your action. You're right. I was feeling good, not knowing how that part of the story would end, with your, bravery and running for office and speaking your mind. And then that consequence kind of unforeseen waiting behind the bend. How often do you go to DC? Do you do a week long at Children's National?
So they've been really flexible with me. I do anywhere for this weekend. I'm going up and I'm just working a Saturday and Sunday shift, and then I'm coming back home. I was just up there and I worked 5 shifts in a row. Okay. So they've been so accommodating because they value having me as a member of their division.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be such a refreshing concept, but it was for me. And I feel, even with the logistical challenges of packing my stethoscope and my hospital ID in a suitcase with my scrubs, it's a little crazy, but sure. It's working for me right now. And It's so important that we understand when we are in spaces and institutions where we're being dimmed, where they're trying to dim our light, that is not healthy.
No.
And not everyone, again, has access or privilege to be able to escape those situations. But if you do, I think I really underestimated the mental weight of being somewhere where I wasn't valued. Yeah. Now, this wasn't my whole 15-year career. For many, many years there, I was treated as a very valued faculty member. But as soon as I sort of escaped that toxic situation, I felt it's just so much healthier for me. And I can thrive professionally in my clinical role at a different institution.
And it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you regret anything that you've said or done or your run or any of that?
No. And no. Some people have asked me if I knew now if I knew then what I know now about what would happen to me professionally for running, would I have decided not to run? And my answer actually, and this came just off the top of my head when I answered this question the first time I got it, was no. I actually would have quit my job before I ran.
Such a good answer.
Because I did have to. Yes. While I was running, I certainly had to be careful to not identify as a member of that institution on the campaign trail. And of course, I followed all of those rules. Of course, I did. But it still didn't matter.
But
right?
Google works, right? People Google you, and what are we doing? It's 2024, right? Can't keep it quiet.
That's right. Yes.
And one other point, I just want to, we talked about the AAP, but, these institutions, these organizations that, physicians are a part of or, can be members of, we need to be putting pressure on them as well. We have the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics. We have, the AMA, American Medical Association. We have the California Medical Association with Mass Medical. There are all of these organizations that, from the outside, I think maybe lay people or non-physicians think, oh, they're protecting you and they're protecting the constituents, the patients and Americans. And quite frankly, too often those are actually institutions that really are not doing those things either. They have their own small agendas. A few people are becoming very wealthy inside of them. But as physicians, I don't necessarily feel protected by the AMA or the AAP. I don't feel like my livelihood or my patients are particularly protected. Yes, they'll issue some guidelines, but in general, I think that we as physicians, for everything that we've discussed over this past almost hour, we need to be putting pressure on those organizations to step up and to be loud as well. If they're going to represent us, and if we are going to pay dues and be a part of these organizations, they need to be reflecting our views on a louder national scale with money, as we've said, because that is really what talks.
Yes, I could not agree with that more. I think we, in medicine, we're all rule followers. That's how we were able to
so obedient.
pass our classes and get, yes, so obedient. So, oh, I should join this organization. I should pay my dues, and I should just like, it's a one directional relationship. They like give me the guidelines and tell me what can and can't be said. And I felt that so deeply. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start my own organization, so that we can say what we want to say and say what needs to be said without going through 17 layers of approval. Like, I've heard from doctors who show up in DC or in state houses for advocacy day, and they get passed out what the advocacy agenda is for the day. And they're like, well, I want to talk about the shooting that happened in my community last week, or I want to talk about, the bans on IUDs and they're like, no, that's not our priority today. That's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this issue that none of you may even care about. And we need to have spaces. So I'm creating our own space where pediatricians and people who care about kids can say what needs to be said without worrying about getting 17 layers of approval or offending someone on the board. Like, our children are not benefiting from a system where we're playing it safe.
No.
And I think we just don't ask questions of these institutions and these organizations.
That's right.
And I couldn't agree more. When you're a dues paying member, you should use your voice, and they should be serving us. And I just wish more people understood this, or understood it from an earlier stage of their career.
That's right. And I think they are. The residents that I've speak to, the trainees, are so much farther in this thought process than I was at their stage. I graduated from residency 10 years ago, and they are effectively where I am now in terms of their thinking outside the box and recognizing the need for more vocal leadership from physicians. I mean, they trained in a pandemic. I did not. And I think that probably changes you. Dr. Andrews, this has been truly one of my favorite conversations. As I close, I want to ask a question of you that I ask all of my physician guests. And that is, did this version of your career happen on its own? Did it fall into your lap, or did you have to take action in order to make it happen?
I love that question. Certainly did not happen on its own. I had to take several very big, brave pivots and leaps to create the version of my career that I am experiencing now. And I have never been more fulfilled. And I truly believe that the work I do every day in 2024 has exponentially larger impact on the health and well-being of children in the United States than the important work that I was doing as a traditional academic faculty member at a children's hospital. I have zero regrets about the pivots and the leaps that I've taken, despite the negative personal and professional consequences I've experienced, because I am so driven every day to do the work that I am privileged to be able to do on behalf of America's children.
Will you run for office again?
If there is an opportunity that makes sense for me to run, I am not one of those people who is one and done, who says I would never do that again. I believe that we need more voices like mine in all levels of government. So if there's an opportunity for me to be one of those voices, I certainly will consider it. But I think that the work that I'm doing now with our PAC to help elect like-minded candidates and incumbents across the country who are in seats that are actually winnable, channeling my energy, my passion, my messaging, and everything I've worked for into people who can win and then be a part of a Kids First majority in early 2025. Like that, I think, is time well spent for me now. And that is a better use of my time, energy, resources, and skills.
You are welcome back to come talk to me anytime. Please come back. Thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. And I am wishing you all of the best in all of your ventures, and I will be watching closely. Please quickly let our listeners know how they can find you, how they can donate, how they can be a part of your organizations.
Yes, so theirfuturepac.org or theirfutureourvote.org. The most fun place to interact with me is on Twitter, Annie Andrews, MD. That's where you get to see the full version of who I am and what I care about every day. So please follow me, Annie Andrews, MD, on Twitter/X and Instagram. But please check out what we're doing with our organization and sign up to receive our emails, because There are so many people, and I'm sure every listener to your podcast cares deeply about the children of this country, but we have to find ways to channel that into effective action. And I believe, obviously I'm biased, that our organization is actively doing that every day. So we would love to have you as part of our team.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today.